Please, you have to help me. My son is dying." The words tore from Sarah Mitchell's throat like a wounded animal's cry as she collapsed against the weathered fence post of the stranger's ranch. Her dress, once a respectable blue calico, now hung in tatters, soaked with sweat and desperation. In her arms, 7-year-old Tommy lay limp as a rag doll, his small face flushed with fever, lips tinged an alarming shade of blue. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. The cowboy standing in the doorway of the modest cabin didn't move. His dark eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of a worn Stetson, studied her with the wariness of a man who'd learned that trouble often wore a woman's face. Scars crisscrossed his weathered hands as they gripped the doorframe, and something in his granite expression suggested he'd already decided his answer. "Can't help you, ma'am." His voice was gravel and dust, final as a coffin nail. Sarah's knees buckled. The golden light of the dying sun cast long shadows across the Montana Valley, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, each chime counting down the precious minutes her son had left. She'd ridden 20 miles through hostile territory to reach this place, following whispered rumors in the town of Cedar Ridge about a reclusive man who possessed knowledge of healing herbs that could cure even the deadliest poisons. Now, staring into the stranger's cold, unforgiving face, she realized she might have doomed them both for nothing. Tommy's breathing grew more labored in her arms, each rattling breath a countdown to catastrophe that would shatter her world forever. But let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. 3 days earlier in the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge, Sarah Mitchell had thought herself safe when she'd accepted the position as school teacher in the frontier town. After fleeing an abusive marriage in Boston with nothing but her son and the clothes on their backs, Cedar Ridge had seemed like salvation, a place where she could start fresh, where no one knew her shame or asked uncomfortable questions about why a woman traveled alone with a child. She should have known that peace never lasted long in the Wild West. It was a Tuesday morning when she first noticed the signs. Tommy, usually as energetic as a Mustang colt, complained of stomach pains during breakfast. By noon, he was vomiting violently. By evening, his fever had spiked so high that Sarah feared his brain might cook in his skull. "Please, Dr. Harrison," she'd begged the town's physician, a thin man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly from age. "There has to be something you can do." Dr. Harrison had examined Tommy with gentle thoroughness, his face growing graver with each passing minute. When he finally looked up, Sarah knew from his expression that her worst fears were about to be confirmed. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm afraid your son has been poisoned. The symptoms are unmistakable. The blue tinge to his lips, the violent sickness, the fever that won't break. Someone has given him oleander extract." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Poisoned? But how? Who would? Understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. Marcus. Her ex-husband had found them. Somehow, despite all her precautions, despite changing their names and traveling across half the continent, Marcus Blackwood had tracked them down. And now he was trying to take away the only thing in this world that mattered to her. How long does he have? The question scraped from her throat like broken glass. Dr. Harrison's silence stretched longer than the Montana horizon before he finally spoke. Without the proper antidote, perhaps 48 hours. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I simply don't have the knowledge or the herbs needed to counteract oleander poisoning." But as Sarah sat beside her son's bed that night, listening to his labored breathing and watching his small chest rise and fall with increasing difficulty. She remembered something. A conversation she'd overheard in the general store, whispered between two ranch hands who thought no one was listening. They'd spoken of a man who lived alone in the mountains, a former cavalry officer who'd learned healing arts from Native American medicine men during his time on the frontier. They said he could cure anything: snake bites, gunshot wounds, even the deadliest poisons. They called him the Ghost of Bear Creek Canyon and claimed he'd saved more lives than any doctor in 3 states. They also said he'd sworn off helping anyone after losing his own family to violence, and that he'd shoot any stranger who came within a mile of his property. Sarah looked down at Tommy's flushed face, so small and vulnerable against the white pillow, and made her choice. If it meant saving her son's life, she'd face down the devil himself. The journey to Bear Creek Canyon tested every ounce of Sarah's determination and nearly cost them both their lives. She'd borrowed a horse from the schoolhouse stable, a gentle mare named Buttercup, who was better suited for short rides to the market than traversing dangerous mountain terrain. With Tommy strapped to her chest in a makeshift sling fashioned from her petticoat, Sarah had set out before dawn, following the rough directions she'd extracted from a reluctant ranch hand after bribing him with her grandmother's silver locket. The trail wound through treacherous rock formations and dense pine forests that blocked out most of the sun. Twice, Sarah had been forced to dismount and lead Buttercup around fallen logs that blocked their path. Once they'd encountered a mountain lion sunning itself on a boulder, and Sarah had sat frozen in terror for nearly an hour before the great cat finally stretched and padded away into the underbrush. But it was the human dangers that truly frightened her. This was outlaw country, where desperate men made their living preying on travelers foolish enough to venture into the wilderness alone. She'd heard stories of women found days later, their bodies stripped and violated, left for the buzzards and the wolves. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Tommy's condition worsened. His fever burned so hot that Sarah could feel it through the fabric of her dress, and his breathing had become shallow and irregular. Each time his chest stopped moving for more than a few seconds, panic would claw at her throat until he drew another ragged breath. "Hold on, baby," she whispered against his sweat-dampened hair. "Mama's going to find someone to help you, I promise." It was near sunset when she finally spotted the cabin nestled in a small valley between 2 towering ridges. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and she could see a horse grazing in a small corral beside a weathered barn. The sight filled her with such relief that tears sprang to her eyes. But as she approached the property line, her heart sank. Warning signs had been nailed to trees all around the perimeter. "Private property, trespassers will be shot," and "keep out. This means you." And most ominously, "danger, armed occupant." Sarah's hands trembled as she guided Buttercup through the gate, half expecting a rifle shot to ring out at any moment. Tommy's breathing had become so faint that she had to press her ear to his chest to make sure his heart was still beating. The man who emerged from the cabin was nothing like what she'd expected. She'd imagined someone old and wizened, perhaps with long white hair and mystical bearing. Instead, she found herself looking at a man in his mid-30s, tall and lean with dark hair that hung to his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by old scars that spoke of violence and pain, but his features were undeniably handsome beneath the harsh exterior. He wore simple clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms, and leather boots that had seen better days. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holstered Colt .45 looking as natural as breathing on his powerful frame. What struck her most was the absolute stillness about him, like a predator deciding whether to strike or retreat. Now, standing before this dangerous stranger with her dying son in her arms, Sarah realized she was about to discover which choice he would make. The man's refusal hit Sarah like a physical blow, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. "You don't understand," she gasped, adjusting Tommy's weight in her arms. "He's been poisoned. Oleander extract. The doctor in town said you're the only one who might have the knowledge to save him." Something flickered across the stranger's face, so brief she might have imagined it, before his expression hardened again. "Doctor's wrong, rode 20 miles for nothing." He started to turn away, and pure panic drove Sarah forward. "Wait, please, I'll pay you anything. I have money, jewelry." "Don't want your money." His voice was flat, final. Tommy's body convulsed in her arms, a weak moan escaping his blue-tinged lips, and Sarah felt her composure shatter completely. "He's just a little boy. He never hurt anyone. How can you just stand there and watch him die?" The man's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought she saw pain flash through those storm-gray eyes. But when he spoke, his voice remained cold. "Told you, can't help. Best you head back to town." "Back to town?" Sarah's voice rose to nearly a shriek. "He'll be dead before I make it halfway. You're his only chance." She stumbled closer, holding Tommy out toward him. "Look at him. Really look at him. This, someone's baby, someone's whole world. If you ever had a child, if you ever loved anyone, don't." The word cracked like a whip, and Sarah saw his hand drop instinctively toward his gun. "Don't you dare." But something in her desperate words had found their mark. She watched as he stared down at Tommy's small, fevered face, and she saw the moment his carefully constructed walls began to crack. "His name is Tommy," she whispered, pressing her advantage. "He's 7 years old. He loves horses and wants to be a cowboy when he grows up. He's never known his father, but he's never let that make him bitter or mean. He still believes the world is good, that people are basically kind. Don't let his last lesson be that he was wrong." The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, filled only by the sound of Tommy's labored breathing and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Sarah could see the war raging behind the stranger's eyes, duty fighting against instinct, past pain wrestling with present compassion. Finally, with a curse that would have made a saloon girl blush, he stepped aside and jerked his head toward the cabin. "Get inside, but I make no promises." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much. Save your thanks." He was already striding toward the cabin, his long legs covering the ground with predatory grace. "Might be thanking me for watching your boy die comfortable instead of hard." The cabin's interior was spartanly furnished but scrupulously clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a simple wooden table and 2 chairs positioned nearby. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, bottles, and dried herbs that filled the air with the scent of sage and pine. It was clearly the home of a man who'd chosen solitude over society, comfort over company. "Put him on the bed," the stranger commanded, indicating a simple cot covered with rough wool blankets. Sarah laid Tommy down gently, smoothing his damp hair back from his forehead. His skin felt like fire under her palm, and his breathing had become so shallow that she had to watch closely to see his chest moving. The man moved around the cabin with efficient purpose, gathering supplies from various shelves and cabinets. She watched as he selected dried herbs, small bottles of mysterious liquids, and what appeared to be medical instruments from a leather satchel. "What's your name?" Sarah asked quietly. He paused in his preparations as if deciding whether to answer. Jake Morrison." "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is Tommy." Jake nodded curtly, then returned to his work. "How long since the poisoning?" 2 days, maybe 3. The symptoms started gradually. Jake approached the bed and began examining Tommy with gentle, practiced hands. He checked the boy's pulse, lifted his eyelids to examine his pupils, and listened to his breathing with an intensity that spoke of real medical knowledge. As Sarah watched him work, she found herself studying the man who held her son's life in his hands, wondering what tragedy had driven him to this isolated existence, and whether that same tragedy would ultimately save or damn them both. Jake's examination of Tommy was thorough and surprisingly gentle for such a hard man. "Definitely oleander," he confirmed, his voice grim. "Whoever dosed him knew what they were doing. This isn't accidental. The amount is calculated to cause maximum suffering before death." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You mean someone deliberately?" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Someone wanted this boy to die slow and painful." Jake's eyes were chips of flint. "Question is who and why?" Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "My ex-husband, Marcus Blackwood. He's been hunting us since I left Boston. He swore he'd make me pay for taking Tommy away from him, even though—" She stopped, unable to voice the ugly truth. "Even though what?" Jake's attention was focused on mixing something in a small clay bowl, but she could tell he was listening intently. "Even though Tommy isn't his son." The admission came out barely above a whisper. Marcus couldn't father children, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it, so he claimed Tommy as his own. When I tried to leave, he said he'd kill us both before he'd let anyone discover his secret. Jake's hands stilled for a moment. "So this boy means nothing to him except as a weapon against you?" "Nothing at all." Tears burned Sarah's eyes. "Tommy doesn't even know. I've never told him the truth about his parentage. I couldn't bear to hurt him with that knowledge." Jake resumed his work, grinding dried roots with a mortar and pestle. "Well, Marcus Blackwood made one mistake. Oleander poisoning can be countered if you know how. The Crow taught me the old ways during my time with the cavalry." "The Crow? Indians taught you medicine?" A shadow passed over Jake's face. "White medicine failed my family when they needed it most. I swore I'd learn every healing art I could find, no matter the source." He paused his grinding. "Didn't matter in the end. Still lost them." Sarah wanted to ask what had happened, but something in his expression warned her off the subject. Instead, she watched as he prepared what looked like several different remedies: teas, poultices, and a thick paste that smelled strongly of mint and something else she couldn't identify. "This is going to be rough," Jake warned. "The antidote has to force the poison out of his system, which means more vomiting, more convulsions. It'll look like I'm making him worse before he gets better." "Will it work?" Sarah asked desperately. Jake met her eyes directly. "Honestly, I don't know. I've treated oleander poisoning before, but never in someone this young, never after this much time has passed. His body might be too weak to survive the cure." The honesty was brutal, but Sarah appreciated it more than false comfort. "What can I do to help?" "Keep him cool. When the convulsions start, hold him down so he doesn't hurt himself. And pray, if you're the praying type." Jake lifted Tommy's head and carefully spooned the first remedy between his lips. Most of it dribbled out, but some went down. Within minutes, Tommy's body began to shake violently, his back arching off the bed. "Hold his shoulders," Jake commanded, and Sarah obeyed, using all her strength to keep her son from thrashing himself off the cot. For the next 2 hours, they worked together in grim determination. Jake administered doses of his various remedies at precise intervals, while Sarah held Tommy through the worst of the convulsions and wiped the sweat from his burning skin. Twice the boy stopped breathing entirely, and Jake had to pound on his chest to restart his heart. "Come on, kid," Jake muttered during one particularly bad episode. "Don't you dare give up on me now." There was something in his voice, a desperation that went beyond professional concern, that made Sarah look at him sharply. but his attention was focused entirely on Tommy, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle as he checked the boy's pulse. As dawn approached, Tommy's breathing finally began to even out. His fever broke with a rush of perspiration that soaked the bedding, but for the first time in 3 days, his skin felt cool to the touch. "Is he?" Sarah began. "Sleeping," Jake confirmed. "Real sleep, not the fever dreams. His body's fighting back now." Relief crashed over Sarah like a tidal wave, and she found herself sobbing as the terror and exhaustion of the past 3 days finally caught up with her. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment couldn't remember where she was. She'd fallen asleep in the chair beside Tommy's bed, her hand resting on his forehead to monitor his fever. Now, morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, and she could hear the reassuring sound of her son's steady breathing. Jake stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. He'd removed his shirt, and Sarah found herself staring at the network of scars that crossed his shoulders and back. Some thin and precise like knife wounds, others puckered and ugly like old bullet holes. Whatever violence had driven him to this isolation had marked him both inside and out. "He's going to be fine," Jake said without turning around, somehow sensing she was awake. "Fever's gone, breathing's normal. Give him another day of rest and he'll be ready to travel." "Thank you." The words seemed hopelessly inadequate. "I don't know how to repay you for what you've done." Jake turned, and she was struck again by how handsome he was beneath the harsh exterior. "Told you, don't want payment." "Then why did you help us? You clearly wanted nothing to do with us when we arrived." Jake poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "Kid reminded me of someone." "Your son?" The cup froze halfway to his lips. "I never said I had a son." "You didn't have to. The way you worked to save Tommy, the way you talked to him even when he couldn't hear you, that wasn't just medical knowledge. That was a father's desperation." Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. His name was Daniel, Danny. He'd be about Tommy's age now if... He stopped, jaw clenching. "What happened?" "Raiders." The word came out flat and hard. "Burned our farm, killed my wife and boy while I was away on a cattle drive. By the time I got back, there was nothing left but ashes and graves." Sarah's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." "Been 5 years. Should be over it by now." Jake took a long swallow of coffee. "But seeing your boy lying there, so small and helpless, for a minute, it was Danny all over again. Couldn't let another child die if I had the power to stop it." Before Sarah could respond, a weak voice called "Dee" from the bed. "Mama?" She rushed to Tommy's side, relief flooding through her as she saw his eyes, clear and fever-free, looking up at her. "I'm here, baby. How do you feel?" "Thirsty," Tommy croaked. "And hungry. Did I miss supper?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "You missed several suppers, but we're going to fix that right now." As she helped Tommy sit up to drink some water, she became aware of Jake watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was longing there, and pain, but also something that might have been hope. "Are you the cowboy who saved me?" Tommy asked Jake directly. Jake's face softened almost imperceptibly. "I helped your mama save you. She's the one who rode through dangerous country to find help." Tommy considered this gravely. "Mama's brave. She saved us from the bad man back east." "Did she now?" Jake's eyes found Sarah's over Tommy's head. "Marcus was mean to Mama," Tommy continued matter-of-factly. "He yelled at her and made her cry. But she packed our things one night and we ran away on a big train. We've been running ever since." "Well, you're safe now," Jake said gently. Bad man can't hurt you here." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Sarah caught the way his eyes shifted toward the window, scanning the horizon. Something in his posture had changed, becoming more alert, more watchful. A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Jake?" she said quietly. "What is it? What's wrong?" His hand dropped to his gun with practiced ease. "We've got company coming." Through the window, Sarah could see a group of riders approaching the cabin, 5 men on horseback, moving with the purposeful pace of those who knew exactly where they were going. "Get Tommy down on the floor behind the bed," Jake ordered, his voice calm but urgent. "Keep him quiet no matter what happens." Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the lead rider. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking Marcus Blackwood's arrogant posture and expensive riding clothes that marked him as an Eastern dandy trying to play cowboy. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Marcus." Jake's expression went deadly calm. "How'd he track you here?" "I don't know. I was so careful." Understanding hit her like a physical blow. "Dr. Harrison. He must have told someone about Tommy's condition, mentioned that I was seeking help from a mountain healer. Marcus probably offered a reward for information." Jake was already moving, checking his weapons with the fluid efficiency of a man who'd done this too many times before. He wore 2 guns, the Colt on his hip and a smaller pistol tucked into his boot. From a cabinet, he produced a Winchester rifle that looked well maintained and frequently used. "How many men does he usually travel with?" Jake asked. "I don't know. In Boston he had business associates, but they were lawyers and bankers, not—" She gestured toward the approaching riders. "Not whatever these men are." Jake's mouth tightened. Hired guns. Professional killers. He positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. "Stay down and keep the boy quiet. This might get ugly." The riders had stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, just beyond effective rifle range. Marcus Blackwood urged his horse forward a few steps, close enough for conversation but still safely distant. "Sarah!" Marcus called out, his cultured Boston accent carrying clearly across the mountain air. "I know you're in there, my dear. Come out and let's discuss this like civilized people." Jake glanced at Sarah, who shook her head violently. Speaking to Marcus would only make things worse. "I said come out, Sarah." Marcus's voice took on the edge of authority he'd always used to intimidate her. "You've led me on quite a chase, but it's time to come home. You and the boy belong to me." Still no response from the cabin. Marcus's facade of civility began to crack. "Very well. If you won't be reasonable, perhaps your protector will. I assume you're the famous Jake Morrison, the hermit of Bear Creek Canyon?" Jake's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "Oh yes, I know who you are," Marcus continued, confidence returning to his voice. "Former cavalry officer. Discharged after a rather unfortunate incident involving the massacre of your family. Word is you've been hiding up here like a wounded animal ever since." Sarah saw Jake's knuckles whiten on the rifle stock, but his voice remained steady when he finally spoke. "State your business and ride on, Blackwood." "My business is retrieving my property, my wife and my son." "Don't see any property here," Jake replied. "Just a free woman and her boy." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Free? Sarah owes me a substantial debt. The cost of raising that bastard child, the money she stole when she ran away, the embarrassment she's caused my family name. She'll be working off that debt for the rest of her natural life." "That's not how the law works," Jake said. "Oh, but it is. You see, I have a signed confession from dear Sarah admitting to theft, forgery, and adultery. Very damning stuff, really. The territorial marshal will be most interested to see it." Marcus's voice turned silky with menace. "Of course, if she comes willingly, I might be persuaded to forget certain unpleasant details." Sarah's heart sank. She knew Marcus well enough to know he was capable of forging any document necessary to support his claims. With his money and connections, he could make life very difficult for anyone who opposed him. "What do you want?" Jake called back. "Simple. Send out Sarah and the boy and you'll never see me again. Refuse and I'll burn that cabin down around your ears." Sarah watched Jake's face, seeing the calculation in his eyes as he weighed their options against impossible odds. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, with death hanging in the balance and no good options in sight. "You've got 30 seconds to decide, Morrison," Marcus called out. "Send them out, or we start shooting." Sarah crawled over to where Jake crouched by the window. "I should go," she whispered. "It's me he wants. Maybe if I surrender, he'll leave you alone." "Like hell." Jake's voice was iron. "Man like that doesn't leave witnesses. Soon as he gets what he wants, he'll put a bullet in my head and probably yours too. Then what do we do? There are 5 of them and 1 of you." Jake's smile was cold and predatory. 5 city boys who've probably never been in a real fight. I spent 3 years tracking Apache raiders through country that would kill them just by looking at them wrong. "Time's up," Marcus shouted. "Boys, light up that cabin." The first shot shattered the window above Jake's head, sending glass cascading down. Instantly, the morning erupted into chaos as gunfire exploded from multiple directions. Jake returned fire with deadly precision, and Sarah heard one of the attackers cry out in pain. "Stay down," Jake barked, working the rifle's lever action with practiced speed. "Keep Tommy covered." Sarah threw herself over her son as bullets whined overhead, splintering wood and punching holes in the cabin walls. Tommy whimpered beneath her, but followed her urgent whispers to stay quiet and still. Jake moved around the cabin like a ghost, firing from different windows to make it seem like there were multiple defenders. His strategy was working. The attackers' fire was scattered and increasingly panicked as they couldn't pin down his position. "Damn it!" Marcus's voice was sharp with frustration. "Circle around back. Don't let him escape." But Jake had anticipated this. As 2 of the gunmen tried to flank the cabin, he'd already repositioned himself to cover the rear approach. His rifle spoke twice in quick succession, and Sarah heard horses screaming and men cursing as the flanking maneuver collapsed. "He's picking us off 1 by 1, one of the hired guns yelled. "This wasn't supposed to be a war." "Shut up and keep shooting," Marcus snarled back, but Sarah could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. This wasn't going according to his plan. The gunfight raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jake's ammunition was running low. She could tell by the way he was choosing his shots more carefully, making each bullet count. That's when she noticed the smoke. "Jake," she called urgently, "they've set something on fire." He looked where she was pointing and cursed. One of the attackers had managed to toss a burning brand onto the cabin's roof. The dry wooden shingles were already beginning to catch, and smoke was filtering down through the ceiling. "We need to get out of here," Jake said grimly. "Roof'll be gone in 10 minutes, and then we'll be sitting ducks." "But how?" "They'll cut us down the moment we step outside." Jake was already moving, gathering supplies with quick efficiency. "Back door leads to a gully that runs behind the cabin. If we can reach the trees, we might have a chance." "What about our horses?" "Have to leave them. Moving on foot will be safer anyway. Harder to track, easier to hide." Jake slung a pack over his shoulders and checked his weapons one final time. The smoke was getting thicker, and Sarah could hear the crackle of flames above their heads. "When I give the word, you grab Tommy and run for that gully," Jake instructed. "Don't look back, don't hesitate. Just run like hell and trust me to cover you." Sarah nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She lifted Tommy into her arms, feeling how much heavier he seemed now that they were running for their lives again. "Ready?" Jake asked. Before Sarah could answer, a new sound reached their ears, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, but from the wrong direction. More riders were coming up the valley, at least a dozen by the sound of it. Jake's face went grim. Reinforcements. Blackwood came prepared for a siege. As the noose tightened around them and the cabin burned above their heads, Sarah realized they might be about to discover just how far Marcus was willing to go to reclaim his property. But as the new riders crested the ridge, Jake's expression shifted from despair to something that might have been hope. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, lowering his rifle slightly. The approaching riders weren't reinforcements for Marcus. They were U.S. Marshals, identifiable by their badges gleaming in the morning sun. Leading them was a grizzled man with steel-gray hair and a face like weathered leather. "Federal Marshals," the leader called out in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Everyone lower your weapons immediately." Marcus's hired guns looked uncertainly between their employer and the federal officers. One by one, they began to comply, clearly unwilling to add murdering federal marshals to their list of crimes. "Marshal Kane," Marcus called out, his voice regaining some of its earlier confidence. "Perfect timing. I'm Marcus Blackwood, and I'm here to retrieve stolen property, my wife and son, who are being held against their will by this man Morrison." Marshal Kane dismounted and approached the burning cabin with measured steps. "That's so? Well, Mr. Blackwood, that's a mighty interesting story, especially considering the warrant we have for your arrest." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Warrant? For what charge?" "Murder, for starters," Kane replied calmly. "Seems a Dr. Harrison in Cedar Ridge turned up dead yesterday morning, poisoned according to the local sheriff. Same poison that nearly killed a little boy a few days back." Sarah felt the blood rush from her head. Dr. Harrison, the kind old man who'd tried to help Tommy, was dead because of them. "That's ridiculous," Marcus blustered. "I've never even met this Dr. Harrison." "Funny thing about that," Marshal Kane continued. "Hotel clerk in Cedar Ridge remembers you asking specifically about local doctors. Barkeep at the saloon recalls you buying a bottle of laudanum and asking questions about poison symptoms. And then there's the matter of this." Kane held up a small glass vial. "Found this in your hotel room. Still has traces of oleander extract in it. Care to explain how that got there?" Marcus's composure finally cracked. "You can't prove anything. This is all circumstantial." "Can and will prove it in court," Kane interrupted, "along with charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, and about 6 other felonies. Boys, arrest Mr. Blackwood and his associates." The marshals moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding the hired guns before they could think to resist. Marcus tried to run, but his horse reared and threw him when Kane fired a warning shot into the air. As the dust settled and the prisoners were secured, Jake finally emerged from the burning cabin with Sarah and Tommy. The roof was fully engulfed now, but they were safe. "You folks all right?" Marshal Kane asked. "We are now," Sarah replied, still hardly believing their reversal of fortune. "But how did you know to come here?" Kane's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. "Well, ma'am, we've been tracking Blackwood for the better part of 2 weeks. Man left quite a trail of bodies across 3 territories. When we reached Cedar Ridge and heard about the poisoned boy and the doctor's murder, wasn't hard to put the pieces together." "But how did you know where to find us?" "That'd be thanks to young Billy Henderson at the livery stable. Boy saw you head out toward Bear Creek Canyon and mentioned it when we came asking questions. Smart kid. Probably saved your lives." Jake was watching the flames consume his cabin with an expression Sarah couldn't read. Everything he owned, every memory of his solitary life, was turning to ash before his eyes. "I'm sorry about your home," she said softly. Jake shrugged. "Just a building. Never felt much like home anyway. He looked down at Tommy, who was staring wide-eyed at the marshals and their prisoners. Besides, some things are worth more than buildings. Marshal Kane approached them. We'll need you folks to come back to town to give statements, but after that, you'll be free to go wherever you please. Blackwood won't be bothering anyone for a very long time. As they watched Marcus being loaded into a prison wagon, his empire of fear and control finally crumbling, Sarah felt the weight of 5 years of terror lifting from her shoulders for the first time since she'd fled Boston. 3 days later, they stood outside the Cedar Ridge courthouse as free citizens for the first time in years. Marcus had been formally charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder, along with enough additional charges to ensure he'd spend the rest of his life behind bars. His hired guns had quickly turned state's evidence in exchange for lighter sentences, providing detailed testimony about Marcus's campaign of revenge. So what happens now? Tommy asked, looking up at his mother with eyes that seemed older than his 7 years. Sarah realized she didn't have an answer. For so long, her entire life had been defined by running from Marcus, by keeping Tommy safe from his reach. Now that the threat was gone, she felt strangely adrift. We can go anywhere we want, she said finally. Back east, maybe, or further west to California. What would you like to do? Tommy considered this with the gravity of a much older child. Could we stay here? I like it here, and Mr. Jake saved my life. Shouldn't we stay near him? Sarah's heart skipped at the innocent suggestion, but she kept her voice carefully neutral. Mr. Jake might have his own plans, sweetheart. Jake had been standing apart from them, watching the street with the same watchful alertness that seemed as natural to him as breathing. Now he turned at the sound of his name. Plans? He repeated. Tommy thinks we should stay in Cedar Ridge, Sarah explained. I told him you might have other ideas about what to do next. Something flickered across Jake's face. Hope, perhaps, or longing. But when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Cabin's gone. Need to rebuild before winter sets in. Will you rebuild in the same place? Sarah asked. Thinking about it. Good water source, defensible position. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Might build it bigger this time. More rooms. The implication hung in the air between them like a question neither quite dared to ask directly. More rooms would be nice, Sarah said softly. Lonely, living all by yourself. Has been, Jake agreed. 5 years is a long time to be alone. Tommy, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult conversation, tugged on Jake's sleeve. Could you teach me to shoot? And how to track animals? And how to make medicine from plants? Jake's smile was the first genuine one Sarah had seen from him. Might could do that, if your mother approves. Could you really? Sarah asked. I mean, we'd pay our way, of course. I can teach school, do sewing, cooking. Don't need payment, Jake interrupted. Need? He struggled with the words, clearly unaccustomed to expressing feelings. Need family. The simple admission hit Sarah like a physical force. This strong, dangerous man who'd killed to protect them, who'd risked everything for strangers, was asking them to stay not out of duty or obligation, but out of loneliness. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, we'll stay. Relief flooded Jake's features, followed quickly by something that might have been panic. Should warn you, I'm not easy to live with. Don't talk much, got habits that might seem strange. Been alone so long I've forgotten how to be around people. We'll learn together, Sarah assured him. All 3 of us. Over the next several weeks, they settled into an unexpected routine. Jake rented rooms for them at the boarding house while he began rebuilding his cabin with help from grateful townspeople who'd heard about his role in saving Tommy. Sarah resumed her teaching duties at the school, and Tommy seemed to blossom under the attention of his new surrogate father. For Jake was becoming that, whether any of them acknowledged it or not. He taught Tommy to ride properly, to identify edible plants, to read animal tracks in the dirt. More importantly, he listened to the boy's endless questions with patient attention and answered them with the kind of respect usually reserved for adults. Sarah watched them together with growing warmth, seeing how Jake's harsh edges softened around her son, how Tommy's natural exuberance drew reluctant smiles from the taciturn cowboy. But it was the way Jake looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching that made her heart race with possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. As autumn painted the Montana mountains in shades of gold and crimson, the new cabin began to take shape in the valley of Bear Creek Canyon. It was larger than Jake's original home, with 3 bedrooms instead of 1, a proper kitchen with modern conveniences, and a front porch wide enough for rocking chairs and evening conversations. The townspeople of Cedar Ridge had contributed both labor and materials, grateful for Jake's role in bringing Marcus Blackwood to justice and protecting one of their own. Sarah found herself spending more and more time at the construction site, bringing lunch to the workers and helping with smaller tasks like chinking between logs and planning the interior layout. She told herself it was just neighborly assistance, but the truth was more complicated. She was falling in love with Jake Morrison, and it terrified her. After 5 years of marriage to Marcus, she'd thought herself incapable of trusting another man with her heart. Marcus had been charming at first, but that charm had quickly revealed itself as a mask for cruelty and control. She'd sworn never to put herself or Tommy in that position again. But Jake was different. She saw it in the way he never raised his voice, even when frustrated. In the way he asked rather than demanded, suggested rather than commanded. In the quiet strength that needed no bluster or threats to make itself known. Most of all, she saw it in his relationship with Tommy. The boy had attached himself to Jake like a shadow, and Jake had accepted the role of mentor and protector with a natural grace that spoke of genuine affection rather than obligation. "Mama, look," Tommy called from where he was helping Jake position a window frame. "I'm really helping build our house." Our house. Sarah's heart squeezed at the casual possessiveness in her son's voice. "Be careful up there," she called back. But she was smiling. That evening, as they shared supper around the fire pit that would eventually become the cabin's main fireplace, Jake broached a subject that had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. "Been thinking," he said, poking at the fire with a long stick, "about what happens when the cabin's finished." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What about it?" "Well, got 3 bedrooms like we planned, but folks in town are starting to talk." "Talk about what?" Jake met her eyes across the flickering flames. "About a single woman living with a single man without benefit of marriage, starting to hear whispers about propriety and such." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Let them talk. We know the truth." "Do we?" Jake's voice was quiet, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. "What is the truth, Sarah?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Sarah looked at Tommy, who was absorbed in whittling a piece of wood Jake had given him, then back at Jake's weathered face. "The truth is, I care about you," she said finally. "More than I ever thought I'd be able to care about anyone again." Something shifted in Jake's expression. And I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "Scared of trusting too much, of believing in something that might not be real, scared of making another mistake that could hurt Tommy." Jake set down his stick and moved around the fire to sit beside her. When he took her hand in his calloused ones, she didn't pull away. "I'm scared too," he confessed. "Been alone so long, I'd forgotten how to care about people. When I saw Tommy lying there dying, when I thought I might lose both of you to Blackwood. It reminded me what real fear feels like." "What are you saying?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, struggling with words that didn't come easily. "Saying I love you, Sarah Mitchell. Love you and that boy like you were my own family. Saying I want to marry you proper, not because of what people might think, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Sarah's breath caught as she stared into his storm-gray eyes, seeing not the dangerous stranger who'd saved their lives, but the wounded man who'd learned to love again, despite all his scars. 6 months later, Sarah Morrison stood on the porch of their completed cabin, watching her husband teach their son to rope a practice calf in the meadow below. The sight still took her breath away, not just the obvious love between man and boy, but the transformation in Jake himself. The harsh lines around his eyes had softened, and he smiled more often now. Tommy's laughter had worked its own kind of healing magic on both of them. Their wedding had been a simple affair at the little church in Cedar Ridge, with half the town in attendance. Sarah had worn her grandmother's pearl earrings and a dress of cream-colored silk that the ladies' auxiliary had helped her sew. Jake had looked impossibly handsome in a new black suit, though he'd been more nervous than she'd ever seen him. Tommy had served as ring-bearer, beaming with pride as he handed over the simple gold bands Jake had ordered from the territorial capital. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Jake kissed her with gentle reverence, Sarah had felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. The month since had been a revelation of small daily pleasures she'd never expected to have. Waking up beside a man who treated her as an equal partner rather than property. Watching Jake's patient instruction turn Tommy from a frightened city boy into a confident young frontiersman. Building a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than fear and obligation. There had been challenges, of course. Jake's nightmares still woke him some nights, and Sarah sometimes caught herself flinching when voices were raised, even in laughter. But they worked through these moments together, with patience and understanding born of shared pain. "Mama," Tommy called from the meadow. "Did you see? I almost got him that time." "I saw," Sarah called back. "Keep practicing." Jake looked up at her and smiled, that rare, genuine expression that never failed to make her heart skip. He said something to Tommy, who nodded eagerly, then began walking up the hill toward the cabin. "Supper ready?" he asked as he climbed the porch steps. "Almost. What were you and Tommy discussing so seriously?" Jake's smile turned mysterious. "Man talk. Nothing for you to worry about." Before Sarah could press for details, Tommy came racing up the hill, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Mama, guess what? Jake says when I get really good at roping, he'll teach me to break horses. And maybe next spring we can get some cattle of our own." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said, ruffling his hair. "But first, go wash up for supper." As Tommy disappeared into the cabin, Jake moved to stand behind Sarah, his arms encircling her waist. She leaned back against his solid warmth, marveling at how natural this felt. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving us a home. A real home, not just a place to hide." Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for giving me a reason to live again." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they now called home. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, not a countdown to death this time, but a gentle reminder of the peaceful rhythm of their new life. Sarah thought of Marcus, rotting in a territorial prison, and felt nothing but pity for a man who'd never understood that love couldn't be owned or controlled, only freely given and gratefully received. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked. "Just grateful," Sarah replied. "For second chances, for finding you, for our family." "Our family," Jake repeated, and she could hear the wonder in his voice as if he still couldn't quite believe it was real. As they turned to go inside for supper, Sarah caught sight of something that made her smile. On the windowsill sat a small wooden horse that Jake had carved for Tommy, next to a bouquet of wildflowers the boy had picked for her that morning. Simple gifts, freely given, with no strings attached. The kind of love she'd never known existed until a desperate mother's plea brought her to a lonely cabin in Bear Creek Canyon and changed all their lives forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the Wild West. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine in creating it, please show your support by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Until our next adventure together, keep believing in the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds.